peace be upon you. Allah bless you all, brothers and sisters. Thank you for joining for this session on answering questions how to learn the Arabic language, or how to encounter the difficulties people are facing when they study the Arabic language. I have received a series of questions, actually a huge amount of questions, which I don't think there's enough time to answer unless we go for hours and hours. But a few of them, and thank you to the Signatura team and to Scholarly Heritage team. May Allah reward them for arranging for this session, announcing about it, and receiving the questions and forwarding them to me. And this actually comes in line with on the occasion of the release of my book, Arabic English Glossary, 700 English words and their meanings in Arabic made easy to memorize in a rhymed poem, or as I named it in Arabic, الذهب الإبريز في لغة الإنجليز, الذهب الإبريز, the pure gold. The book is based on a new old method. New because it hasn't been used in this field of learning Arabic in the past century or at all, probably. And old because this is the way we learn all disciplines in the Arabic language, through memorization of didactic poems. I know that the Arabic language is quite, the English language had a history of the classical studies in terms of memorization and focus on memorization and the use of mnemonics, which probably ceased with the beginning of the 20th century. In Arabic, it hasn't ceased, it didn't stop. It's still a living tradition. If you want to study grammar, you have to memorize the 1,000-line poem of Ibn Malik, Alfiyatu Ibn Malik. You want to study logic in Arabic, you memorize As-Sullam of Al-Akhdari. You want to study Malikite fiqh, you memorize Al-Murshid Al-Mu'in, and etc. We have hundreds of poems. My father, the greatest scholar of Damascus in his time, memorized thousands. So said that he probably memorized 50,000 lines of didactic poems. In almost every discipline, we have didactic poems, odes. Even in medicine, we have this. So this is a traditional way of helping people to recall the information in that discipline by imprinting the information in their minds through a rhymed poem with a certain rhythm that helps filling in the gaps that are needed. I followed the same method in putting this poem with as much as possible. It came into 200 lines of Arabic poetry, which means 400 in English, because every line in the Arabic language is made of two parts. And I put the words in a list. This is the glossary in the beginning. It came to be almost, I think, above 700 words and phrases, expressions or idioms, phrasal verbs, nouns, infinitives, prepositions, etc. There is in the book, in the beginning, an English introduction, but then there is an Arabic introduction, because the book is meant in two directions. It's meant for learners of Arabic and for learners of English, Arab learners of English. The rhyme used in this is quite easy. This is the meter. We have 16 main meters in Arabic prosody in writing poetry. And I used one that is known as al-mutadarik, sometimes known as al-hazij, fa'ilun, 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 fa'ilun. Here with تسكين الثاني فعل 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 فعل. So it goes like that. If we read from the beginning of the poem, بحمد الله وذا أحسن أشرع في نظم كالسوسن. With the praise of Allah, which is the best, I start casting a poem that is like iris. يجمع كلمات من لغة جل الناس إليها يركن. Compiling words of a language that most people rely on. So if we read from page 109, line 47, wonder يتساءل في أدب تحت أندر ثندر رعد وأرز رايس وجليد آيس إن قلت برايس فالقصد ثمن. So as you see here, I put English words together, mostly that are rhyming with each other or with alliteration. So in line 47, we read wonder, under, thunder. 48, rice, ice, rice. 49, advice, mice, rights. And then men in the word of the rhyme, the last word of the line. The rhyme of this poem is and it goes like that. Sometimes it is an Arabic word like dan, jun. Sometimes it is an English word like them or men. Arabic like amman, yahzan, han. English like let me in. So I switched variably between the Arabic rhymes and the English rhymes. So you go to line 107. He is fluent ثم eloquent معناه فصيح ثم لسن. فصيح ولسن. He is fluent ثم eloquent معناه فصيح ثم لسن. وشراع سيل والقارب بوت أسطول فليت قل شيبس لسفن. واسم للمقبرة graveyard لكن شراين تعني مدفن, etc. So to help people learn, I made look up the words. I presented the list, and this is the glossary in the beginning. The poem itself is written in twice, once all in Arabic and once with the English word in Latin letters as they are originally written in the English language. I hope that this book helps people who are looking for a new way or a different method to master Arabic, to increase or strengthen their knowledge of the English language, the Arabic language, inshallah. And also for those Arabs or Arabic-speaking people who are trying to learn the English language. With this, inshallah, I hope that I can answer a few questions. One question I have here, how to study Arabic? Modern Standard Arabic or Fusha? Now, to answer this question, I need to know what is your goal. Because we have people studying the Arabic language for several reasons. Some are politicians, diplomats. They want to work in the Arab world and they want to speak the language of the people there. So those usually aim at learning dialects, the spoken Arabic in that region. And it varies. And this is what we call al-Ammiya. There are people who study Arabic because they want to read Al-Quran Al-Kareem. They want to read in sacred texts. And for those, we say they should study classical Arabic or Al-Fusha. But to study classical Arabic all from the beginning may be difficult. So usually people start with modern standard Arabic. Modern standard Arabic is the language written and used in newspapers, in articles today, and spoken in, let's say, news broadcast on various TV channels in the Arab world, which maybe 70%, 80% Fusha, but sometimes it uses new expressions or new derivatives that are not approved by Fusha or by the assemblies of the Arabic language, Majami' al-Lugha al-Arabiyya. So there is this shift. And also one of the differences between modern standard Arabic and Al-Fusha, modern standard Arabic tries to avoid tough words. Al-Fusha's vocabulary or the range of words used in Al-Fusha are quite large, and it takes a bit of knowledge and also how to look up words in a dictionary in order to note sometimes their meanings or the actual meaning meant in that context. The Arabic language is miraculous. The Arabic language has over 2 million words, far ahead of any other language in the world. Over 2 million words and more because of the ability to derive. This is the science of etymology, ishtiqaq, the ability to derive from the roots and use. It's still growing and growing with the assemblies of the Arabic language in the Arab world, in Cairo, Syria, especially in Jordan later. They are trying to approve new words and put new names to new inventions. So this is one of the major differences. When you study modern standard Arabic, you might not be able to sail easily in a classical text. However, studying modern standard Arabic helps you understand, let's say, to a 70-80% of the text presented to you in classical books. Now, every subject has its own jargon. Now, I speak English, I studied English. It doesn't mean that I can hold the book on medicine and understand everything in it. I would have to look up many words when I go into the field of medicine, because this is not my jargon or not my field of interest. The same also if you go to another subject. Every discipline has its own jargon. So the same also in when you study, you come across the Arabic language. What is your interest? Literature? Then you're in front of a vast area, and here you have to see the use of metaphors, allegories, similes, etc. So set up your goal first, and then you follow the method that is the shortest way or brings you the goal in the shortest time. Would you recommend parents teaching their young children Arabic alongside their Quran reading? If so, how? No, I do not recommend. I do not recommend. You'd be surprised. It's a burden. It's a burden on kids. You don't have to learn Arabic. Arabic is not part of the Fardul Ayn, or what is obligatory on you. Islam did not make it obligatory on people to speak Arabic or to learn Arabic. This is why you see the largest Muslim nations in the world, let's say Indonesia, and then Indian Muslims and other nations, they don't speak Arabic on a daily basis. Islam did not erase their languages. Islam did not aim at replacing their cultures, their languages by the Arabic culture and the Arabic language. What is obligatory is that you must pray 5 times a day, and you need to know some basic Arabic in order to recite Al-Quran Al-Kareem. Some surahs of Al-Quran Al-Kareem, the adhkar needed for your prayer, tashahhud, salawat al-Ibrahimiyya, subhanallah, Allahu Akbar, sami Allahu liman hamidah, etc. You need the dua that are needed in the morning, in the evening, before you enter the bathroom, when you enter your home, or when you get in the souk, or when you look in the mirror. There are recommended dua which you need to know in Arabic in order to repeat. Few basic things, and that's all. You don't need to learn Arabic. It's not a must for everyone, and especially when kids are at a small age. Sometimes people feel some frustration because they study Arabic for a year, and then after a year, they are never able to speak Arabic. And I've seen this actually in adults. They study Arabic a lot, and then they are not capable of speaking Arabic. So they forget it over time. We don't want this. Now, the reason for that is because when you study a language, if your goal is to speak the language, then you should be living in the country where the language is spoken, so that you train to speak it out of necessity. I wouldn't have been able to speak English to you now if I stayed in the Arab world. I went to England and studied English in England until I mastered it. I remember when I came to England to study English, I couldn't understand the broadcast in the train station, the announcements. I couldn't understand what people were saying in front of me. I would pick up a word from here, a word from there, 10%, 5% of what is spoken in front of me, although I had studied some English before. And my story of studying English actually would be probably amazing to hear, because I'm a good example of how possible it is to master a foreign language even when you're quite old enough. Because when I started learning the English language, I was around 25, 27, 26, between 25 to 28. These years in Damascus, I started studying. It came to my mind that I should master foreign languages. So I started studying English and German at the same time. It didn't work because I had other obligations. I had the classes, Friday khutbahs, students, etc. I ran some business at that time also. My late brother, Sheikh Yahya al-Yaqoubi, rahimahullah ta'ala. So I couldn't manage. I would attend one class out of 7, 8 classes. Then after a couple of weeks, I would find myself behind my classmates, so I would stop. A couple of months later, 3 months later, I get the urge to study the foreign language. Then I go and register and pay the fee for another course. Then go attend a few classes. Then I miss a lot because I'm too busy. Then get behind the classmates. Then again, cancel it or just leave it and then look again for a new course after a few months. It didn't work. This is because I was busy with other things. I couldn't focus on learning the English language. And if you ask what language I learned in schools, I learned French in schools. And there's a good story here to mention. In Syria, in our time, the second language was added at grade 7, intermediate school. So first 6 grades, pure Arabic. And of course, I was memorizing didactic poems and the Quran Kareem and the Hadith at the time, 40 Hadith of Imam Nawawi already, and a lot more, and attending classes with my father, rahimahullah. So in the summer vacation, before being admitted to the intermediate school, my father, rahimahullah, anticipated and thought that I should study English and be ahead of my classmates, expecting that I would be studying English, or hoping so, in schools, because at that time, in our time, it was only French and English. So I went to school, and at that time, the government didn't have enough staff to teach English. So with every 10 classes, 9 would be studying French and 1 would be studying English. So in order to do justice to the students, they made the choice of the language by lottery. In a big bag, you pick up a piece of paper, and if it says French, then you go to the class where French is taught. If it says English, then you go to the class where English is taught. And I picked up a word, and it came up French. So I had to study French. I studied French till all my school and uni, etc. And I came back home that day, and my mother was upset, rahimahullah ta'ala. She thought that my father could go to school and ask them to change because I had already had a few classes. One of my father's students sat me in the Darwishia Mosque and gave me few classes in English, just the numbers, the alphabet, few short sentences, which later I forgot. So my father came home and said, don't worry, he'll learn both languages, French and English. That's it. I never learned English again till years after he passed away. And look at where I am now. The efforts I put in learning English are probably 10% than the efforts I put in learning French. I attended many courses of French in the French Cultural Center and other institutes to master it to the top, even at a literary level. My writing in French was quite literary, of high style. I used to read very well and pronounce, but I never practiced the language in the society. So up till now, even I studied French 10 times more than English. My speaking ability is very limited. I have to make up and think to make a sentence and reply to someone, although I understand a lot of what is said in front of me. But this shows you that the practice of a language is quite important, especially where the language is spoken. French or English or any other foreign language is not practiced in Syria. People, those of you who went to Syria, they know that the Syrian people speak purely Arabic. Although Amiya dialect, Syrian dialect, it varies from a town to another, but they don't speak foreign languages in the streets, unlike other countries, maybe the Gulf, maybe Morocco, where you can manage if you know French or English in these countries, but not in Syria. So there was no point in trying to speak the language in the country where it is not spoken. I studied and studied and studied, but now speaking French is not easy. I don't have the skills of fluently speaking French. So it tells you that if you want to master speaking Arabic, you have to be in an Arab country for a certain time till you master the language, to a point where you can't forget it, unless it is like too long. So to finish my story of how I studied English, I went 1991, the end of it, to Sweden. And that was the first European country I traveled to. And in the streets, I started communicating with people. And I only knew few words of English, never finished a class to properly speak. And I was trying to put some French sentences, speaking to them, mostly in French in the beginning I was speaking. It didn't work. In Sweden itself, again, I started classes, studying from 9 till 12 English and from 2 till 5:30 Swedish. It didn't work. Why? Because to master a language, you need to be in the country where it is spoken. You need to speak the language and focus on it. So I traveled from Sweden to the UK and studied the English language and put all my efforts, 10 hours a day, just studying English in an institute and then private classes, spending time reading newspapers, articles, looking upwards, every effort till I set the proficiency exam of the English language, and I passed and I got the proficiency certificate of the English language, which actually in the Arab world allows me to teach English as a foreign language. Just to give you an example of how much this certificate or degree is appreciated in the Arab world. But here is the point. The key point is that you should stay in a country where the language is spoken and practice it while learning it. And I would put it in a nice way. People say sometimes that the English people do not speak foreign languages, but actually this is it was an advantage for me at that time, because if they spoke another language, I would have been able to communicate with them in the English and get the words out of my mind and out of my mouth to master it. The same happened with me then later on in Sweden. I returned to Sweden and focused on learning Swedish till I mastered the Swedish language. at that time. And I remember once I traveled from Stockholm to Gothenburg in a car and was speaking to the driver, and over a 3-hour drive, and the driver didn't realize that I was a foreigner. He thought even I was a person from Gothenburg. He thought native. Even the accent of the people of Gothenburg at that time, I picked up. But now, of course, after all these years, I can't speak the language, the Swedish language, as fluently as I used to. I used to lecture. I used to give lectures in the Swedish language. I remember once I was invited to a debate in a church, sort of a dialogue, almost in the form of a dialogue, but it is a debate with an atheist lady of Iranian descent, married to a bishop in Sweden, who had been in the country for almost 20 years or over 20 years at the time. So, and I was speaking in the beginning in English because my English was still better than my Swedish at the time. And this is must be in 1994 or the end of 1993, beginning of 1994. So, and I started speaking in English, and the audience protested because they were elderly and they mastered German more than English. So they asked me to switch to Swedish, and I started speaking Swedish. And it turned out that my Swedish was better than my opponent's Swedish. And the moment I started speaking Swedish, the audience actually applauded for me a lot, and I won the debate. And because, winning their hearts and their sympathy and their support, quite important. And they already sympathized with me, and they were ready to accept anything I would say, just because they were struck by the eloquence of the language and the neat use of vocabulary and the syntax, etc. So, yeah, if you want to teach your children, I recommend focusing on few things for your children. First of all, tajweed al-Quran al-Kareem, not just hifz. Tajweed, the way the Quran al-Kareem is pronounced, with the rules of tajweed, makharij al-huruf, kha in al-Quran al-Kareem, when it is mufakham, musta'li, kha, ghayn, ha, ha, ayn. Good pronunciation, good tajweed. This is one important point which people miss often. Second, I recommend teaching your children poems, nice poems, even Arabic poems, good. طلع البدر علينا الحمد لله والشكر لله يا إمام الرسل يا سندي بشرى لنا نلنا المنى, etc. Such songs are nice, and especially when you explain to them their meanings. You sing these songs to them when they go to bed, for example, and get them to be in rhythm with these poems. But learning the language itself is a specialty. You want to learn Arabic, you should see what is your goal and where you're heading for. You want to be a teacher, you're studying the sacred knowledge. Yeah, you need Arabic. If you're studying the sacred knowledge of Islam, you need the Arabic language, and you need to study it and master it. One of the good pieces of information which I learned when studying English, you could learn from my experience in learning other languages. I studied few other languages. I studied Persian because it was obligatory on us in the University of Beirut program in the Arabic language. I got the degree in 87, and I never attended the class in Persian. And I got first year, I think 90, second year I got 95 out of 100, high marks, because it was based on studying grammar. I studied Biblical Hebrew also at the University of Gothenburg in preparation for my PhD at that time, which I never finished because I found that serving the Muslim Ummah is more needed and more important than having a PhD. Later on, a few years ago, 10 years ago, I was offered the PhD, and I apologized. I don't need it. It doesn't add to me any credentials or anything, not in deen, not in dunya. Anyway, But in the Arab world, the biblical Hebrew is taught in Semitic departments or as a part of the study of the Arabic language. One has to study comparative studies with other Semitic languages. You pick up biblical Hebrew or Aramaic, Assyrian, Akkadian, etc. These languages are usually studied. And studied German, also attended a few classes, actually 4 levels. I reached level 4 in Goethe Institute in Damascus up till 89. And then also studied in Germany itself in the summer of 1993. And I was able to communicate in German quite well. Until now, probably a few sentences I can speak and communicate with people. I can read much better, of course. Again, it is the practice of the language. And I haven't spent much actually studying English. And you see me, delivering speeches and speaking hopefully fluently. This is because of the practice. Übung macht die Meisterin. Exercise makes the master. This is what they say. So in order to master a language, you need to read fluently 5,000 pages of it. By fluently, I mean read while knowing the meanings of everything. So later on, you pick up any book you want to read, and then you might come up across a word that you need to look up in a dictionary. Never mind. That's okay. Until now, sometimes we need to look up English words because of the variety of vocabulary, of the large vocabulary used by some, let's say, some writers use different words. So it doesn't matter if you look up a word. But when you read 5,000 pages in order to master a language, you need to read 5,000 pages in it, knowing the meanings of what you read, looking upwards, even if the same word you need to look it up 10 times till it gets deep in your mind, in your memory, so that you don't forget it. Is it possible to learn Arabic in a non-speaking land? It is possible. It is possible. And there are countries now, India, for example, there are great learning centers in India where you study Arabic from beginning to end, and you reach a point where you speak Arabic with the scholars, all in Fusha, and you don't need to travel to the Arab world. And there are great Indian scholars who became great scholars in India itself before traveling to the Arab world for Hajj or for journeys to seek extra knowledge or seek ijazas from scholars. And we rely on the works of these scholars, such as Imam Shah Waliullah Ahmad ibn Abdul Rahim al-Dihlawi al-Umari, died year 1176 of Al-Hijrah. His son Abdul Aziz al-Umari. Before these also, there were great scholars, Alauddin al-Muttaqi al-Hindi, who later on traveled to Mecca. I believe he died in Mecca. Etc. And famous Imam Ahmad Raza Khan also became a great scholar in India, wrote even poetry in the Arabic language. So yes, indeed, it is possible. But if you tell me how, then I will ask what type of persistence you have, and what type of community you have, and what is the school, the environment in the school that you're studying. Most people now study online, and online doesn't give you that opportunity often to practice the language. The same also when you have your classmates all speaking the same language that you speak, and you're communicating with them with the same language. It doesn't help you speak Arabic or practice it. So skills are different. You may master the Arabic language in writing, in reading, but probably not be very fluent in speaking. Is there a dua to help, or dhikr? All types of dua, all types of dhikr help studying Arabic and other subjects, because you have to have a pure mind, protect yourselves from sins. You need to be surrounded by angels. This will give you tawfiq, success in all of your studies. Of course, Ya Fattah, Ya Alim, these names from Allah subhanahu, of the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are great for acquiring knowledge. Ya Badi', Yeah, Badi' is great. Also, one of the 99 names that has benefits in learning new skills, especially when you're learning new skills. If you're memorizing Al-Quran Al-Kareem, reading of Surah Al-Muzammil helps a lot. If you have a weak memory and you want to strengthen your memory, you may recite the following verse: سنقرئك فلا تنسى, Surah Al-A'la, سنقرئك فلا تنسى, etc. What advice to give students who wish to improve their translation skills? Yeah, that's quite a good area here. It's a good area. Those who would like to translate should read a lot in Arabic and look up also a lot in dictionaries. Always have dictionaries close to them, especially dictionaries that cover the metaphorical meanings, such as Asas al-Balagha of al-Zamakhshari. Al-Zamakhshari, famous scholar, famous for his tafsir al-Quran, al-Kashaf. He was a Mu'tazilite. He wrote this dictionary, Asas al-Balagha, and the unique feature of this dictionary is that he doesn't only mentions the actual meanings of a word in dictionaries, but also he uses the metaphorical meanings. And this is an area where sometimes people get mixed up. They come across a text. So one of the good things is to look at mutun, the abridged or concise text, and their commentaries, where you see the word explained, the Arabic word explained. And also to look at earlier translations or other translations by highly respected translators who mastered the Arabic language. My experience in the beginning was quite humble. I used to hold the Mus'haf with the translation of Abdullah Yusuf Ali. I used it a lot in the late 90s and early couple of years in 2000, 2001, 2 probably. So because I wasn't that fluent in finding the actual words when I want to quote a verse from Al-Quran Al-Kareem in my speeches or classes. But later on became fluent. And now when I read, to be honest, translations of the meanings of Al-Quran Al-Kareem commonly now published, a few of them I've had looks at few of them, I find common errors in them. And none of them satisfies, let's say, my intelligence or comes up to the level I expect of the eloquence and the rendering of the meanings in the Arabic verses. And I've given one example. I wrote an article on how the verse on jihad is wrongly translated in most of the translations. I've looked up the English, the French, the German, the Swedish translations. And this is when it says strike terror in the hearts of your enemies and the enemies of Allah. Islam didn't come to strike terror in the hearts of people. And this is وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ وَمِن رِّبَاطِ الْخَيْلِ تُرْهِبُونَ بِهِ عَدُوَّ اللَّهِ وَعَدُوَّكُمْ تُرْهِبُونَ. And most translations use to strike terror in the hearts of the enemy of Allah and your enemy. And this is wrong. تُرْهِبُونَ, to deter. To deter. It's the same, etymology. Terror is from the same root as deter, because the root in Latin is terre in Latin. You add the prefix de, which means to stop the terror. To stop the terror. Deter, that is to say, to install enough awe in the hearts of your enemies that it prevents them from attacking you. This is the rahba, this is turhibuna, not to strike terror. So this is one example. I give another example usually of how also some common verse wrongly translated, and this is quite important. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There's nothing like him. There's nothing like him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unlike all created beings. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ. وَهُوَ, this wow here, all translations suggest that it is atuf, conjunction. So they use and he is. And this is because most translators did not study علم المعاني and the chapter on al-fasl and al-wasl, the connection and disconnection between sentences. And al-waw here is not atuf. Al-waw here presents, actually separates two sentences. The second of them is almost opposite, or brings a statement that is contrary to the first and confirms it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laysa kamithlihi shay. But you shouldn't think that he's not hearing and he's not seeing. There's nothing like him. But when you take this sentence alone, you might think, okay, we hear and we see, so he doesn't hear, doesn't see. So the sentence comes to negate that idea by telling you, yet he is, yet he is. So al-waw here acts as the istidrak, or yet he is the all hearing and the all seeing. So that's how you connect the two sentences together. And I have a list of many examples of common errors in translations, not to mention books. I have taught books and I've read the translations, and sometimes in public while teaching, I would have one of my students reading from the translation. I would be holding the Arabic. I reached the point now that I teach a long time ago. I want to teach a book like Tahawiyya or Muwatta or Sahih Bukhari. I want to teach it in English. I make my own translation. Yes, sometimes I admit that I may lack a word of a bird, rare bird, or a rare plant. I might not recall it. I have to look it up, but that's it. Because of the common errors, mostly it is the style, the connection of words, or the metaphorical meanings that are meant by the statement, which translators do not pick up on. So you need a lot of experience in this field, and don't be upset if you make mistakes in the beginning, but you should always have someone reviewing what you do, someone who is professional, someone who is highly skilled to review what you translate. So I will do with this, inshallah. And I will be happy to answer later on questions, inshallah, if sent to me and published by Scholarly Heritage or Signatura. Short questions, I call them one-liners, because you can answer them quickly and easily. Especially, you go to interviews, jobs interviews, etc. If you send me questions that are yes or no, I'd be very happy. Or click and unclick, I'll be happier, actually. Allah bless you all. I just want you to smile. Brothers and sisters, thank you. I think I'm told by Signatura teams that the book is sold out, alhamdulillah. And this is due to your love and your trust. And may Allah reward you for your love and for your trust and for your adab. And may Allah allow us, inshallah, to benefit more and to learn more and to transmit this knowledge to the Muslim Ummah and benefit the Muslim Ummah and act upon what we learn. And may Allah please and cool the eyes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with our states of the hearts and our actions. And may Allah keep us firm on the path of guidance until we meet him. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Allah bless you all. Thank you.